Right now we're here with Jim Himes. Me and my partner Devin Lohman are honored to have him on the program. He is the federal congressman of the 4th Congressional District in the House, which stretches over all of Fairfield County. He recently beat out longtime Republican Representative Chris Shays in the last election, and he's currently serving on the Committees for Financial Services and Homeland Security. Thank you very much, Mr. Himes, for being here to answer some questions.
Thank you for having me, Eric.
You recently voted in favor of extending the Bush tax cuts for the wealthy, which President Obama initially opposed. Why is America continuing to provide low taxes for the wealthy during a time of massive economic deficit and cuts in federal programs?
Right. No, it's a good question. Look, the thing to remember is that the tax compromise that we voted on and that I voted for in December, which passed with strong bipartisan support, wasn't just tax maintenance of the tax cuts for the wealthy that came out of the Bush tax cuts of 01 and 03. Most of that bill was actually an extension of unemployment insurance for people who were going to run out of unemployment insurance. It was a payroll tax holiday, which will really help middle-class folks. You know, they're going to see a few more dollars in every paycheck and whatnot. So a lot of the stuff that was that helped the wealthiest folks in our society, which was, both the upper income tax breaks plus the estate tax, the state your estate pays when you die, was actually a relatively small percentage of the overall deal. But the answer is, why are those things important? And there's two answers. That's the question. There's two answers to that. One is there was no deal with the Republicans without that in it, and they just made that very clear. We either extend the tax cuts for the wealthy or there's nothing else on the table. So there was a political reality there. The other thing going on, and this was important as I thought about it, was that we are still not out of this economic mess. And while doing what we did, extending unemployment insurance, extending tax breaks for everybody, the payroll tax holiday, cost a lot of money. It also was important to help stimulate the economy. And while tax breaks for wealthier families are not as stimulative as other things you can do, you're talking about a lot of purchasing power there. So bottom line is that in a moment of very, very questionable recovery, that's not a time to be raising taxes on anybody. But pretty soon we're going to have to revisit that.
Next, we'd like to ask you, what is your position on the deep budget cuts Republicans and some Democrats are proposing?
Well, two things to say about that. One is, we've got a very serious fiscal situation in this country, meaning we have to figure out over time how we're going to balance our budget. There's just no two ways about it. If we don't do that, eventually investors will lose confidence in U.S. treasuries and lose confidence in our economy. So we've got to do it. And that's going to involve sharing a lot of pain around a lot of areas. In fact, it has got to involve a concept which I think is really important, which is shared sacrifice and no sacred cows, right? Everything is on the table. Now, some things need to be cut hard. I would put agricultural subsidies, oil company subsidies, other things like that on the table as things that should be cut hard. Other things we need to be very, very careful about. Investments in our railways, in our highways, those things which allow our economy to thrive, including, by the way, investments in education. I think those are critical, high-return spending, if you want to call it that, investment if you don't, that we need to make. So what the Republicans have proposed, and they've proposed cutting $60 billion out of the budget in the next 7 months, first of all, is probably not feasible. I mean, you'd be talking about, firing FBI agents, shuttering whole agencies, kicking kids out of Head Start. Those cuts are of a kind that, frankly, are not intended to be good policy proposals. They're just, frankly, throwing red meat to the Tea Party. And by the way, if enacted in the size that they were enacted, they would probably badly hurt our economy. And don't listen to me on that. Wall Street investment banks like Goldman Sachs have said that if they do that level of cutting, expect to see the economy grow maybe 2% less than it otherwise may have grown. So, look, those level of cuts are not smart. Some cuts, though, are critical. But most importantly is just showing that we've got a plan. We talk about all these cuts in the non-defense discretionary part of the budget, which, guess what, is 15% of the overall budget. We need to look at defense. We need to look at all government spending and say, hey, over the next 20 years, we've got to get it under control. Nothing is off the table.
You were mentioning before some of the cuts that could negatively affect your constituents. These could include NPR, Planned Parenthood, and most of all education, including a 32% cut for the disadvantaged and a 66% cut in school improvement. How do you think your constituents will respond politically to these cuts?
Well, you threw out a bunch of different kinds of cuts there, and let's just talk about one or two of them, right? So, significantly cutting funds for education. So now all of a sudden fewer people are going to college, particularly kids with disadvantages that are qualifying for things like Pell Grants. That's just stupid in the sense that now they're not going to be capable of being as good, an employee as they might have been. Maybe they're not going to go out and start that company. There's that old saying, if you think education is expensive, try ignorance, right? And that's true at the society's level, not just at the individual level. So, big cuts in education are just, as they say, eating your seed corn. Let's talk a second about Planned Parenthood, right? The Republicans have gone after Planned Parenthood because they hate organizations that perform abortions. They're very anti-abortion, and fair enough. People, and I don't agree with them, but there are a lot of people out there who think abortion is murder and they want to go after Planned Parenthood. But here's the thing. Planned Parenthood only spends about 3% of its overall budget performing abortions. Most of what it does is teaching women how to use birth control, educating them in a way that is going to help them avoid an unwanted pregnancy. So I'm particularly fired up about that cut. It's called Title X. It would gut funding to Planned Parenthood, which is all about helping women avoid unplanned pregnancies. And, there's been estimates out there that should the funds to Planned Parenthood be cut, you can expect to see somewhere between 300 and 400,000 abortions every year that otherwise would have been prevented by good family planning. So those are just examples of some really dumb cuts that have been put forward by the Republicans.
Now I'd like to ask you, what is your position on cutting the two most expensive social programs, specifically Social Security and Medicare?
Right. Well, now we're talking, right? Now we're talking in the sense that, the real action, the future problems in this country have to do with the promises that we have made, frankly, not to today's retirees. And I want to be very clear about this up front. Nobody is talking about immediate cuts to Social Security or Medicare in a way that would damage current retirees. However, when you look down the road 20 years, if we don't reform these programs, we will simply not be able to afford them. And so the key now is how can we rejigger those programs so that they continue to offer, in the case of Medicare, a basic level of good health care to all of our seniors, and Social Security continues to make sure that seniors aren't living in poverty in a way that is sustainable, right? And so the answer to that is, first of all, it's not going to be on the backs of anybody who relies on those programs today, right? That'd be changing the deal, and it's not on the table. It's not something I would ever support. But what we can do is we can do what we did back in 1983 and just say, guess what? On Social Security, we can, increase the amount of wages that are subject to the Social Security withholding. We can move the retirement age a little bit over time, not surprising anybody, but moving the retirement age over time in a way that will allow that program to be permanently sustainable. The thing we need to remember here is that, these programs are really important to a lot of seniors, so we have to be careful about them. But that they are in a little bit of trouble for no reason other than the fact that our country is getting older. 50 years ago, we had a lot more young people, saving in Social Security and paying into Medicare relative to the number of seniors that were actually drawing it down. Today, that pyramid, if you will, has flipped, so we've got a little bit of work to do.
And moving on to health care now, an issue that's very much on the minds of Americans. U.S. district judges in states like Florida and Virginia have already deemed parts of the health care bill unconstitutional, and the case will most likely go to the Supreme Court. Why would you say that this health care legislation is constitutional?
Well, what you didn't point out was that of the 5 courts that have ruled on the constitutionality of the health care bill, 3 have deemed it to be constitutional and 2 have deemed it to be unconstitutional. So we're having a real discussion and very interesting discussion, frankly, in the courts. Senator